the largest urban forest in the world.
Tijuca.
It's not anymore. This forest has today 3,200 hectares in the middle of the city, dividing the city on south, Copacabana, Ipanema, the north, the international airport, all this is a huge area, the west, where will be the Olympics, the recent area, modern, and the east, we don't have east because downtown is at east, where you are. But into the west side of Rio, where is Prainha, and there are like 5 kilometers of beaches, very wild in the forest, and you have there another forest 3 times bigger than this one, also inside Rio. And but this is a white stone forest, that one. But like 30-40 years ago, that one was outside the city. But the city grew around, and that one became urban. So it became bigger. Yeah, it's bigger. But the history of this forest is very particular because Rio was the capital for almost 3 centuries. And we always use the resources of this forest into the city. There are many rivers, and 3 main rivers always supplying the city with water. And also we was cutting the trees to use the wood into the city. The areas around the forest was sugarcane plantations for a long time. And we use the rivers also to the milk. In the beginning of the 18th century, England had the tea monopoly. And France started to plant coffee in Haiti, thinking to introduce into the world market. And it was so successful, then the King of Portugal sent to Haiti a spy to steal a plant of coffee to bring to Brazil. And they tried to plant coffee in Amazon, but the conditions there was no good, and sometime later they brought a plant of coffee to Rio and started to plant into the Tijuca Forest. And the height, the soil, the weather was perfect, so they was cutting the trees everywhere and replacing by coffee fields. That was the first place in Brazil where we planted coffee in big scale. So these coffee farms was developing everywhere, and in 1808, Napoleon was conquering Europe. But the only country in the continent of Europe not conquered by Napoleon was Portugal. Because one day before the troops arrived in Lisbon, the king took all his family and all the court, and they moved to Rio, and for 13 years Rio was the capital of Portugal. The first thing the king made arriving here, he created the botanical garden to acclimatize species from all the Portuguese possessions that exchanged with other botanical gardens to start to plant here and then in all Brazil, because it was so much close to Portugal to come to Brazil than to go to India or China. So they say for 13 years in 1821 was finished Napoleon, so they all moved back to Lisbon. But the king left here his son Pedro to keep governing Brazil as a colony. But all this royal time here changed Brazil a lot, and the people was thinking on independence. And with this pressure, Pedro, the September 7, 1822, declared independence of Brazil. And he declared himself Pedro the First, Emperor. He governed Brazil for 10 years, but his father died in Portugal. So he moved back to Portugal to be the king there. And he left here his son, Brazilian, Pedro too, with 5 years old, to be the next emperor. And all his family was gone, and the small Pedro staying with someone of the government responsible to govern till his majority. And in 1841, with 16 years old, he was crowned Pedro II. But at this moment, the Tijuca Forest was changed everywhere with the coffee plantation, and they was getting big problems with lack of water into the city because the rivers was drying, because the sources was unprotected without the forest. And also all the hills here was falling with erosion. So the Tijuca Forest was degraded. Then Pedro II in 1850s made a big work of expropriation into the forest and ordered to the coffee farmers to quit, go in other places in Brazil, but you need to leave this area. And in 1861, he demanded to a major of the army to coordinate a team of 6 slaves, and for 30 years those 6 slaves replanted the forest.
With little plants.
Not big trees, small plants, to leave the forest grow again. And they used the local plants from the areas around, but they used also all the plants from the botanical garden with more than 40 years old, with plants from many different countries. And that made this forest became as unique because it's a mix. It's like a huge botanical garden in the middle of the city with a mix of native and exotic plants from all over the world.